I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I am the editor and VP of Streaming Media Magazine and streamingmedia.com and the conference chair for Streaming Media West. Now, normally we'd be meeting in Huntington Beach right now, but as we all know, these times are anything but normal for anything, really. So I'm glad we can meet online, and glad to have so many people joining us today who might not have been able to join us in person. We've had a great selection of panels all week long. We've had deep presentations on technical streaming issues from CMAF to WebRTC to ad technology, and also panels looking at everything from live streaming to esports and sports streaming, how to build OTT channels, and all of our programming will be available on demand at the Streaming Media YouTube channel beginning, should be up there Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, if not sooner. So look for these sessions up there then. And things continue next week with our Content Delivery Summit on Monday and several deep dive workshops throughout the rest of the week. So thanks again for joining us. Before we go any further, I would like to thank our platinum sponsor for Streaming Media West Connect, and that's Limelight Networks. And we have a word from our sponsor right now.
At Limelight, we're in the business of connecting people to exceptional digital experiences. Our real-time Edge platform has launched and grown some of the largest video properties in the world. When there's a high-traffic industry event via the internet, the chances are we're helping deliver it. The difference? Limelight's global private network puts content and applications right next to your customers at the network edge. This result is the most dynamic real-time interactions, no matter where your customers are or what their business is. Like our network, we've also optimized our software stack to be fast, reliable, and secure. And our customers have unrestricted access to live regional technical support whenever it's needed. Limelight Networks has the capacity, the global footprint, and expert service worldwide needed to meet the growing demands for online content now and in the future.
And I'd also like to thank the sponsor for this panel, and that's Verizon Media. And Darren Lepke from Verizon Media is joining us in our discussion today. If you have any questions over the next hour, please put them in the Q&A tab. I'll keep monitoring that and pass the questions along to the panelists. This is a Zoom webinar, so cameras and audio for the audience are not enabled. So if you raise your hand, we're still going to ask you to put the question in the Q&A tab anyway. Now, we have had discussions all week long about how to build OTT channels people want to watch, how to personalize those channels, server-side ad technology, but we haven't spent an entire hour talking just about monetization, and that's really what it's all about, of course. And so we want to focus on that for the next hour or so, on how OTT services can make money and become profitable, what different models are being effective for what different kinds of services. And I've got a great panel of speakers here today. And so I'd like to begin by asking them to introduce themselves. And I'd like to thank them for all taking time out of their busy schedules, and especially Sarah Fisher from Axios, who as a reporter is probably busier than most of us. Sarah, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, so great to be here. My name is Sarah Fisher. I'm the media reporter for Axios.
Wonderful. Next up is Mark Young from Fandango Now and Voodoo and Rotten Tomatoes. And is there anything else since we last updated your title?
Hi, thanks for inviting me. Really excited to be here. So I oversee global strategy, business, and corporate development for the Fandango Network.
Great. We also have Michael Gamboa from Roku.
Hi, great to be here as well. My name is Mike Gamboa. I lead the partner growth team at Roku. So just at a high level, my team manages the top content partners on Roku from Netflix, Disney, Fandango, and is responsible for setting an overall growth strategy for each partner. So we manage the relationship across multiple touch points, from the distribution deal all the way down to participation in the Roku channel, really trying to drive mutual success for us and our partners.
Great. And Darren Lepke. Darren, good morning.
Hey, Eric. I'm Darren Lepke, the head of video product management here at the Verizon Media Platform. We're a B2B services provider that powers many of the major platforms and services that we'll be talking about today.
Terrific. Let's start out, since, as Mark mentioned before we actually got online broadcasting today, since it is very much an alphabet soup when it comes to monetization, I'm just going to share a real quick slide here so that we can sort of set the terms, even though some of the terms might be debatable as to who falls into what category. But, you know, as we go down the list, SVOD, subscription-based video on demand, AVOD, ad-based, fast, free ad-supported TV, typically live linear, TVOD, transactional video on demand, whether that's rental or purchase, a relatively new term, and there may have been a new term since last night that I haven't picked up on, PVOD, premium video on demand, for first-run theatrical releases like Trolls World Tour and Mulan. And then there are, of course, hybrid and TRIBRID models. So with that setting the stage, I want to first ask Sarah, as the media reporter for Axios, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in the market right now in terms of the models that are finding success, the models that aren't, and give us your overview of how things may have changed in the last 6 months or a year?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think one of the big changes that we've seen is that alongside people's SVOD, subscription video on demand subscriptions, things like Netflix and Amazon, consumers are looking for a free alternative to those subscriptions. They obviously can't afford, we've seen Maggot has come out with some pretty strong studies, to pay for more than maybe 3 or 4 of these subscription services a month. And so AVOD, the advertising video on demand free services, they're sometimes also called FAST, free ad supported services, they are really rising. And so what do those look like? We've seen them be acquired by big telecom companies. If it's Pluto TV acquired by Viacom CBS, or if it's Tubi, or if it's any of these 4-letter word sort of services, they all are getting acquired. And to that end, on the free side, when it comes to the overall consumption in television, free broadcast TV is rising too. And it's been rising, but amid the pandemic, it's really taken off. And so what that is, it's called over the air. It's where you use, your little TV bunny ears to get a signal. And we found that it's rising because people want to get free access to broadcast while they can pay for their Netflix subscriptions. The biggest manifestation of that was probably this week, where we had, or last week rather, Scripps acquired ION for $2.6 billion, which is a mostly over-the-air syndicated service. So that's my general overview of what we've seen. But the rise of free has been a big theme, not just throughout this pandemic, although it's been expedited throughout the pandemic, but really throughout the past year.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that people are doing is that people are definitely finding those fast services that you mentioned, that free ad-supported live linear TV, in a way that maybe wasn't true even 6 months or a year ago. Mike, from Roku's perspective, what are you seeing in terms of the trends, in terms of monetization models and what people are gravitating towards?
Yeah, for sure. I would just to add on to what Sarah said, I totally agree with her. I mean, just from our standpoint, we have the Roku channel, which is, quote unquote, a fast. It's one of the fastest growing apps we've seen in the history of Roku. And we've seen tremendous success driving viewership and engagement for our content partners. I think what most people don't realize is the majority of content within the Roku channel is actually provided by content partners on the platform. And we're really helping them to drive incremental audiences. And we've seen tremendous success with there. So I do agree that kind of the rise of AVOD and fast services is a huge trend that we are seeing. To go to your original question around monetization models, I think what's interesting is that digital distribution really provides content partners with multiple options to enable access to content, and then a choice in how to monetize that content. I think there are definitely pros and cons to each model. One key thing for me is while multiple monetization models really opens up opportunities. You have AVOD and SVOD combos like a Hulu or CBS All Access. Having an AVOD tier enables you to have a lower entry point for the SVOD service. But I think having multiple business models presents a ton of challenges. And I think expertise in each is really key for success. If you look at someone like a Netflix, they're extremely successful because they do one thing and one thing only, and they're best in class in all aspects with respect to SVOD, from customer acquisition to billing conversion rates to managing churn. And so I think success in both an SVOD and an AVOD hybrid model requires different technical and monetization capabilities. And you really can't downplay how hard it is to execute in each business model and properly to do it well. So I think from my standpoint, while having a multiple AVOD, SVOD combo can really lower the entry point for SVOD services, you widen the potential audience and you can drive additional revenue, ad revenue per engagement. It is difficult to execute and it does potentially introduce customer confusion. So there are definitely pros and cons to having a multiple business models.
Right, and we'll come back to some of the challenges of trying to execute one of those multiple monetization models a little later on. But Darren, as someone who works for a company that provides technology primarily for advertising, what are your thoughts about the pros and cons of the various monetization models that are on the market today?
So definitely agree with Sarah in terms of consumers having an upper limit on the number of subscriptions that they can afford. I know myself personally, I'm north of probably 5 or 6 at this point. But I'm kind of a super fan in that I'm in the industry. So yeah, 3 to 4 sounds about right for the average person. I would say the appeal of free services is definitely there. But I think there's some challenges to solve in the advertising industry, right? I think everybody looks at the total revenue for TV advertising, and then they say, well, let's just try to carve out some of that. Let's bring it over to the world of OTT. And there's some real challenges associated with that at high level and on a kind of day-to-day basis. So while free services do have an appeal in that it's easier user acquisition, there's lower barriers to entry to get people on your service and potentially to retain them. I think there's still a little bit of work ahead to do from a technology and business perspective to make OTT advertising as profitable as the television market today.
Mark, your thoughts on the multiple models on the market and the pros and cons of each?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what most of the panelists have said. I think at the macro level, what we look at is, an entertainment consumer, regardless of the acronym you put in front of it, consumes across all different models. And it depends on the content availability, depends on their entitlements, meaning are they a subscriber to one service but not another. Window availability still is a big part of our ecosystem today. So I look at it as, if you're a platform or a network like we are, you want to have as much time spent as you can with consumers who covet all sorts of content, whether it's short form, long form, AVOD, SVOD, TVOD, because those are consumers, when you look at a lifetime value, you can best serve when you understand how to use CRM through your identity and data platforms and keep a customer relationship for a longer period of time.
Absolutely. And Mark, I've got a follow up for you on that. TVOD, the transactional model with purchasing or renting content, had kind of fallen out of fashion for a while, although I suppose, when I look in the library of Marvel and Disney movies that we bought for our kids before Disney Plus showed up, plenty of people are still using it, right? Plenty of people are still renting and purchasing content. So it never really went away. And now, of course, we have this PVOD model, where there's these premium first-run theatrical releases, or what would have been first-run theatrical releases for renting or purchasing premium content. Where do you see TVOD and PVOD fitting into the overall landscape?
Yeah, so you're right that the market for transactional video is still a very large market, and particularly if you look at the size of DVDs, surprisingly, if you look at how much is still left in physical goods. So we think about, physical to digital transformation, and there's still a large addressable market in that respect. But as I mentioned before, I think as long as the industry is supported by studio releases that have what traditionally is called windowing, which just means availability consumers, we think there's an opportunity for continuation of consumers paying a premium for availability, for example, of a Mulan that went first to Disney Plus and now is going to go to PVOD. And we think that that's an opportunity to tap into some consumers that didn't subscribe to Disney Plus. On the other hand, we saw Trolls be very successful in Scoob. And so when you look at the different model experimentation, some people would rather buy a premium EST for ownership and have that as repeatability. And so it's not unlike what EST is today, but I think when you start to think about the theatrical model and where producers and distributors decide to maximize their yield, we're seeing a lot more opportunity as Fandango to be a platform that both producers and distributors can choose, and consumers, because at the end of the day, we've got 75 million uniques that we can advertise to, that we have first party relationships with, whether it's in home or out of home.
Hey Mark, just a quick question. Do you have any thoughts on the AMC Universal agreement to kind of collapse the theatrical window?
Well, I think it was a great testament to coming together and trying to forge, a future that, everyone hopefully can have a fair value exchange. And, I think AMC is leading that effort amongst its peers, and we're hopeful that the other exhibitors start to grab onto that opportunity.
Going back to the Mulan piece for a minute, I'm curious to hear the opinion of Sarah and a couple other folks, but I think there was a perception that Mulan was potentially the first of, the first sign of a tidal wave shift in the distribution windowing strategy, right? Here we are in a pandemic, you couldn't actually, deliver things to theatrical windows. Everybody was kind of edge of their seat. Like if Mulan could succeed and could make a ton of money, then potentially the entire, theatrical approach could be shifted to digital. My perception is it's kind of a mixed bag, right? It wasn't a slam dunk. It wasn't something that's going to convince every other movie studio to think more about PVOD and to release on digital first. Does everybody else kind of feel that way, or did I read it wrong?
No, I mean, I totally agree. I think the economics don't make sense that every movie could go out in PVOD. If you're a studio, you're going to need theatrical revenue in order to maintain the same levels of growth that you've been maintaining, especially if you're a company like Disney, and especially if you're a company that relies on overseas theatrical revenue. What are you going to do? Just put things in digital in the US and rely on the theaters that are opening around the world where coronavirus is not as bad? There's definitely still always going to be room for theatrical. I think the question is, you're going to have to figure out where and what makes sense to place your bets. If you look at Trolls was unique in that there was no competitive movie out there that was doing the same type of rush to PVOD at the time. So it wasn't like they were competing with a bunch of other movies doing so, like what we saw towards the end of the summer. It was a kids-focused movie, and so you have a lot of parents who don't have their kids in camp, and it makes sense to buy. And if you take a look at the production cost, if you need to break even on a movie, Trolls is not the same type of investment for a studio that a live action remake like Mulan is. And so it makes more sense that you can say, okay, well, we're only going to make 100 million from, and that sounds like a lot. For folks that are at this panel that aren't in the movie industry, 100 million, yeah, a lot, but you're looking at $1 billion for what was expected from Mulan in theaters. For a movie like Trolls, where your production cost is not that high, 100 million is pretty good. You might break even on that. But for a movie like Mulan, 100 million is not satisfactory. And so I think that's why you saw Disney change its strategy in the past few days and going to the PVOD model, moving it from Disney Plus. I think they just weren't seeing enough Disney Plus ads to make it economically viable. And in the future, I think this was their test. They said this was their test and their experiment. You're not going to see them do this with big blockbuster hits because the money doesn't work out.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. Theatrical's here for the long term.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think anyone thinks theaters are going to go away. But I think what's interesting with PVOD is that it's not an either or. I think having a theatrical release with a PVOD, it gives users more choice, right? The ability to watch in theaters or at home. I think anytime we give users more choice, I think that's a benefit that's kind of the best avenue. And so I think the advent of PVOD has kind of demonstrated that the economics, the technical infrastructure is in place to support a streaming release, and it is a viable kind of distribution avenue. It's not going to replace the theatrical, but I think it is incremental to theatrical for people. If you have young kids and you can't leave and you need to hire a babysitter just to go to a theater, I think PVOD is actually a viable alternative. And so I don't think it's going to replace anything, but more be additive to kind of additional revenue streams.
And quickly, just to add on that, that's why I loved, Mike, your question to Mark on the Universal and AMC deal, because I think the future is, to Mark's point, more exhibitors look to strike those types of partnerships to give consumers the choice, so that instead of having to wait 90 days to stream a film, you're waiting 17 days, and that feels more viable.
Yep, agreed.
Let's talk about advertising a bit more for a minute, and let's start at a high level, and then we'll come back to it in more detail later. Darren, what do you see the biggest challenges that OTT service providers are facing when it comes to advertising, both at sort of the macro level and the micro level?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the macro level, when you think about, well, let's start with the kind of viewpoint of the advertiser or the brand who are looking to reach an audience, right? When they look across the landscape of the different touch points for their target consumer, there is television, of course, there is OTT services, there are online destinations. And really, what you want to do as a, an agency or brand is to be able to reach all of your audiences at all these different touch points in a very kind of easy, streamlined model, right? So you think about all the work going into, ad tech, when you think about the Lumascape of the ad tech industry and everybody who's trying to put out a converged buying model, like there's just a ton of investment between, television, household addressable advertising, digital out of home, and OTT, right? So the one thing that's lacking there is a kind of unified currency for measuring audience, right? On television, it's based on ratings. On the web, it's kind of it's based on clicks and viewing time. So at a macro level, I think it's the challenges are at the business level to get the entire industry to agree on, a common way to measure, whether or not your ad was viewed. And there are also efforts underway. I think Nielsen and others, Comscore, are all trying to be the next currency of advertising measurement in kind of a cross-platform approach. So we'll see. I think it's going to take a little time, right? We have to remember there's 70 plus years of advertising history and industry, habits to break. And, OTT has really only been a thing in the last 5 years, right? So a little bit of work left to do there. On the micro level, that's where you start to see the OTT service providers really, scratching their chins, right? It's a job day in, day out to maximize their profits and revenue. They have to do everything they can to increase their fill rates, increase their yield. And so for that, what we're seeing is, the need to be a little more responsive in terms of the performance of their partners. All the different kind of ad providers in their waterfall need to be, as highly performant as possible. They need to get their ad sales team as much data as possible about their viewers. I think, Mark talked a little bit about having a good view of who your viewers are and how frequently they visit and what their demographics are. But as a technology provider to those folks, we're starting to see more and more requests for, almost real-time data around their ad performance, so that, when you're doing something like the Super Bowl, or you're doing something like, the World Cup finals, like a major live event, you have to, be able to, adjust even while the event is happening. You have to be able to adjust what you're doing in order to really maximize your investment in that particular event.
We actually have a follow-up question from the audience, and it's for you, Darren. What is your opinion as to why linear ads are more profitable to brands than when served up on OTT platforms? What work needs to be done specifically to make ads served on VOD, for instance, more profitable?
I think the promise of linear viewing is that it will get people to watch longer, right? I think, right or wrong, I'm not sure if the stats necessarily bear that at the overall level. Like I think there's a lot more viewing happening on, say, Netflix, which is not ad supported, versus, Hulu these days. So I think it's a little bit of a perception problem, maybe, in that people who will watch linear content will be committed for the full half an hour, and thus will be exposed to more ads. I think in linear viewing, I think there's, an expectation for ad breaks where you have, the beginning of the program and then, ads after Act 1 and Act 2. But for VOD, I think the expectation is you get a pre-roll, you watch the entire thing, and maybe get a post-roll at the end, and the technology needed to insert an ad break on VOD content is not always there, or it's very disruptive to the viewing experience when you're halfway through a scene and an ad pops up. So again, I think it's a little bit of business and a little bit technical, but ultimately, OTT and digital provides us the opportunity to measure that. So I think the more we get the tools in place, the more we look at the data, I think we'll be able to make, better informed decisions about linear versus VOD in the future.
Yeah, I would just add that I think digital still needs more attribution to demonstrate ROI. There's a lot of reach and efficiency in digital, but when you start to think about whether it's attribution for purchase from a conversion perspective or time spent, video starts, some companies have a full vertical solution like ourselves, and some don't. So I think the more that there's data sharing across the different waterfall companies that you can understand as a buyer, how your media performed on their platform for the ultimate intention of your media spend, I think that'll really accelerate digital.
Keeping on the advertising theme, Sarah, we all know that advertising in general took a dive when the COVID pandemic hit. Not because of a lack of inventory necessarily, but because viewing skyrocketed, but because brands were pulling back on their own spending. What's your sense of where the advertising market is headed now? Are those dollars going to come back? Are they coming back? And what's the future look like?
Well, advertising generally tends to grow at the same rate as the GDP. And so if you want to understand how the ad market's going to grow, you have to talk to an economist. If you talk to most advertising buying agencies, the big global ones like Magna or Zenith, those are the ones who we rely on for most of our predictions. And some of the big networks, they say that they expect a pretty much full recovery in 2021. However, a lot of that recovery is going to be biased towards digital. Digital will continue to grow. Linear television, radio, and print are expected to continue to decline. The only type of traditional media that's going to continue to grow is out of home. And that's just quite frankly because a lot of out of home screens are going digital. In terms of what that means for television and theatrics cinema, there is a lot of cinema advertising, and that's what this panel is talking about. You're going to see a stark divide between recovery in local and national television in the US. National television is expected to continue to recover in 2021, and a large part of that is because the Olympics have been shifted to 2021. We're also going to see sports mostly come back, and that's a huge boost to national television advertising. Local TV is going to struggle, and that's because it's going to be an odd year, so we don't have many federal elections to boost political advertising, and that's typical. We always have up and downs for local, but it's going to be really stark. The other reason it's going to be stark is because while most advertising verticals are expected to come back and recover, there's two that are not. And that's autos and retail. Now, retail we know is not going to recover as much. One, because we still expect a lot of footprints to be closed until there's a vaccine. But auto is because in a time of economic struggle, big ticket items take a nosedive. Things like timeshares, things like cars. Now that's going to have a tremendous effect on the local ad market. And what that matters for OTT and all of these streaming players is that if you are a streaming player, let's say like a Hulu, that doesn't typically do too much geo-targeted advanced TV advertising, it's more personalized and customized to interests, you'll probably be okay. But there are some OTT ad platforms that do think about more geo-targeted by locality advertising, and they're going to struggle. Local TV ads are going to be a big problem in 2021. And then also, just a reminder, cinema advertising is going to be a mess too. I mean, there's a lot of ads that run before you see a movie in a cinema, and with cinemas still operating at a very, 40 to 50% capacity, we're going to expect some of that advertising to go down.
Right. Darren, any thoughts on that to follow up?
Yeah, so, in addition to running our kind of video services platform, we also do operate a, B2B ad tech business at Verizon Media. And the good news is we've definitely seen the V-shaped recovery that, everybody has talked about, right? So we saw the very steep decline in ad spending starting in February and March. And, for most parts of our digital advertising business, we have returned to, pre-COVID levels. So it was literally a dip that turned around probably, June of this year. It's not not across the board. There are, parts of the advertising, the digital advertising, business, which are still struggling. But in general, I think we're starting to see the brands open back up, be convinced that consumers are spending and are worth targeting and worth spending advertising around. So from our perspective, I feel like we're getting back on track, even now, even in, September, October of 2020.
Mike, what are you seeing on the Roku platform?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is there's still a disparity in kind of time spent and viewership in linear TV and the advertising dollars that are there. We're definitely seeing viewers are moving away from traditional pay TV, moving to streaming, but the advertising budgets are still mostly, for the most part, stuck in the linear side. And so I think there's, over the next few years, you're going to see a shift where the ad dollars have to follow eyeballs and where users are going. And so I think advertising dollars tend to move slower than viewers, but over time, I think I think just looking at the industry, we've seen traditional media networks kind of advertising their dollars are down. Roku is, our ad business is up kind of, high percentages year over year. And we're going to continue to see that growth as more viewers move away from traditional pay TV and move to streaming. And then ultimately, once the technology is there, the targeting kind of and whatnot, I think you will see those ad dollars start to shift over. I think there's this $70 billion advertising market. I think only a percentage of those goes to OTT, and that doesn't kind of align with where viewers are moving today.
Okay, let's switch over to talking about some of the hybrid models. And Mark, I'd like to start with you. We all know that, modifying a monetization strategy or adding an AVOD component to an existing SVOD service, it's not as easy as flipping a switch. Can you talk about what some of the challenges and opportunities there are for companies like yours that, you've acquired Voodoo, which has an AVOD component in addition to the TVOD component. What are the challenges there and what are the opportunities?
Yeah, so going back to kind of what we talked about earlier, we look at our cohorts as consumers that consume content across different business models and life cycles. And so, AVOD has a role for driving more time spent within an overall ecosystem that we operate. And, we think that whether it's long form or short form content in AVOD, it has an opportunity to entertain consumers. And in some cases, if you look at our movie clips content, it's actually short form content for engagement, but also to drive people into consideration for purchase and rental. And so we think of that as, easy snackable content, but also an opportunity, low barrier to get in to the ecosystem. I think that the differences are really just making sure that you're very sophisticated in the way you look at your first party data, both browsing and consumption data, and have a good CRM system, because ultimately, how those consumers want to be messaged to, ultimately how they want to pay and what they want to pay with, whether it's Venmo or PayPal or other traditional forms of type of banking. We have to be very sophisticated in understanding each consumer's need. So from that perspective, if we get that right, we think we have more choice for consumers as they come into our network. And again, we have an advertising model to complement that time spent. So we have a multi-revenue stream that has allowed us to fortunately be a very profitable, sustainable business model.
Hey Mark, I'm curious, are you going to bring the AVOD model to the Fandango transactional service, or is it going to be solely housed in Voodoo? You don't have to answer if that's too deep.
Yeah. We have a meeting with you guys soon to talk about that, right? But I think for now we're just keeping it where it is. It lives within our ecosystem. For those of you who don't know, we've had a long-standing relationship with Roku. It's been very great for both parties, where we power their transactional video on demand, and we're really excited. And we're going to also bring a Rotten Tomatoes OTT program to the Roku channel. So we're getting into the space with our combination of original content, review content, but also movie clips, which is just a gangbuster for us on YouTube. It's got 2.5 billion video views a month. So we're excited and, continue to diversify.
Yeah, and Fandango is embedded in the Roku UI. So on the left-hand menu, it's the embedded kind of transaction service. But I did notice, I was in Voodoo yesterday, and I noticed there's Peacock movies available for free in Voodoo. So you guys are kind of combining Fandango plus Voodoo plus Peacock. It's interesting.
Yeah, so we're owned by Comcast NBC. Fandango was purchased back in 2008, and so as we look at opportunities to help each other, we think that there's an on-ramp into Peacock through our AVOD service on Roku. So we're exposing consumers to that within that stream.
I'm wondering about about dealing with consumer confusion that comes along with these multiple models within the same service, where consumers don't necessarily know when they open a particular service, what they're going to get, when they're going to be asked for money, when they're not. How do you deal with keeping your messaging consistent and clear to consumers? And maybe Sarah, since you you look at all these services, you have some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think consumers are overwhelmed and confused. There are a lot of options and they all cost different amounts, and consumers have limited budgets. And especially now with some of these smart TV interfaces and with hardware devices like Roku or a Fire Stick, Amazon TV, Google Chromecast, it's so easy to just sign up and click and access something for a free trial, and then it gets added to your bill. That my biggest concern is that while there's tremendous choice, we haven't figured out a system that makes it easy to discover and navigate. There's been a few new products that I think are starting to solve that problem, and they're going to be the future. I think Xfinity X1 is one of the most dynamic platforms. That's the platform from Comcast, which is, as Mark had mentioned, the parent to NBC Universal and Fandango. And what that does is it lumps a consumer's subscriptions all together so that they can discover all the titles across them and that they can easily navigate them, especially also through some sort of a billing structure. I think that's the next big forefront, is how do we make this easy for consumers? Because I think what we've come across in this panel is the innovation's there, the choice is there, the scale is there. But what we want to do is make this easy for consumers, not overwhelming.
Yeah, I would just add that I think the term that we talk about more from a business perspective is entitlement. So consumers want to know, what am I able to watch that I'm already subscribed to? What do I have to pay for? What's for free? And I think, MVPDs like X1 are doing a good job. There's some independent companies as well. From a Rotten Tomatoes perspective, we're also trying to help consumers. When you come to our destinations on Rotten Tomatoes, we have curated lists. We also have link outs. And so ultimately, back to, is this a title that's available to you on Netflix? We try and be, discreet if it is. If it's not, then you have other alternatives to pay for it. But we also want to make sure, back to looking at our user journeys of our consumers, when they're on our platform, we also want to recognize, did they go out to see a movie last weekend? And perhaps it's not time to message them to go see a movie this weekend out of the home, but in the home it would be. So, from a programming perspective and from a marketing perspective, that's the next level of discovery to personalization that I think the industry needs to get to.
Yeah, and I think this is actually something we take for granted because we live and breathe this stuff. But if you look at someone like an Amazon Prime or even an Apple TV, within Amazon, there's content that's available for free if you're a Prime subscriber. There's transactional content. There's AVOD content with IMDb, and then there's embedded channel services like HBO, Showtime, and Starz within Amazon. So if you're a consumer who doesn't live and breathe this stuff, it is very confusing of what do I get, what's for free, what do I need to pay for on a transactional basis versus subscription. I think the amount of times I've had to tell my mom that she signed up for HBO within Amazon, but she's going to the HBO app on Roku and she can't access it there. It's like, no, you need to go to Amazon and then find HBO within Amazon. It's extremely confusing. So it's the one thing that I think the industry, it's a big challenge for the industry, helping consumers understand what's available, what's not available, in what business model, and how to access it. Is challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for those of us who've been around for a while, we look at it as the great unbundling to the great rebundling. And it's just going to be different players. In some cases, old players will make it and some won't. But, this notion of, a single sign-on, that I can have entitlements in an environment that knows my payment preference, that has my history of my consumption, it's difficult in this environment where it's very fragmented. And I think consumers are starting to show that they need more of a one view of their household.
And if I could just add one other thing on the consumer side is, as linear television ads migrate to digital, we are going to have to be mindful of privacy and creepiness. This was a problem with digital advertising. It got too creepy. People started to add ad blockers. And in this rise of AVOD, we want to make sure that our advertising capabilities are respectful of the consumer experience. They don't feel creepy. They don't feel weird, because then you're going to see that same type of rebuke happen in the digital television that happened online, which is people will either pay more for their subscription services so they don't feel freaked out. We don't really have like digital TV ad blockers yet, but who knows? That could be something that happens.
I think advertisers would consider that to be a happy problem. Like just the state of personalization and targeting and creepiness in OTT is not quite there yet, right? And in fact, I think one of the bigger challenges is ad fatigue, just having people watch the same ads over and over again. I'm a baseball fan, so I remember, I have burned in my brain the same 76 Gas, AWS, and Bay Area NBC Sports ads burned into my brain because I literally watched the same ads for between every single inning for an entire season, right? So I do think, yes, we do have to be concerned about privacy. We absolutely cannot bring some of the weird creepiness of the web to the OTT space. But I think right now the investment that's going in from a technology perspective is actually to get more personalized, to get more targeted, to bring in more sources of inventory to a direct sales team or to a programmatic waterfall that may not be hitting the floors that a particular content provider has set. So for us, we're seeing things like even the emergence of web technologies like header bidding now coming into the world of OTT, where you may have a direct sales team, you may have an ad partner like a FRI1 or a Google or a SpotX who is managing your campaigns and bringing in programmatic inventory. But now we're also seeing a desire to get out and search a bigger marketplace to see if there are better offers even outside of your core partner. So things like pre-bid are going to start to emerge in the world of OTT, just because I think the services are just looking for more opportunities or more demand from a higher CPM source that they may not be getting today.
I want to come back to that question of ad fatigue and ad diversity a little bit later, but we do have a question from the audience regarding this issue of consumer confusion. So I want to come back to that for a minute. Almost everyone has said, the challenge is helping to educate the consumer. How do we go about doing that? And are there services out there that are coming, that are coming to light that will allow consumers to help better understand and manage their subscriptions and what's available? I mean, right now, if someone in my family wants to watch a movie, the first thing I do is go to Google and see what services it's available on. And Google does an okay job with that, right? But not a perfect job, in that if it tells me, it'll tell me something's on Hulu, but it doesn't tell me if it's in the basic tier, the premium tier, only with live linear, etc. What's on the horizon? What can we do, or what's coming up?
I can just real quick. Roku has a universal search tool. So if you search for a piece of content, what it does is it ranks, well, first it finds that piece of content, shows where it's available, and then it ranks it based on availability to the consumer. So if we know that you're authenticated into Netflix, technically that show or movie is free to you. So we rank it based on availability and then price. If it is based on a transactional, we show kind of the lowest price to highest. So Roku is trying to tackle that across multiple services. I think the challenge for Roku is that we don't really own any of the content. We're more of an aggregator. And so we rely on our partners to kind of work with us to help kind of create that best-in-class search experience. But universal search is kind of one way that Roku is trying to tackle that problem.
Yeah, I think Roku's done a great job. I mean, not only as a personal user, but just in terms of the consumer confusion and back to what do I get for free versus what I have to pay for. I mean, I think the other thing that is going to be interesting to watch play out is, you've got these closed gardens in some cases with companies that have a vertical solution. Google, as an example, has Google Play. And so at what degree do these companies that own the top of the funnel for discovery also take into consideration consumers' preferences for who they want to do business with? As an example, like if you do business with Voodoo or Fandango now, not only do you have that choice, but is that your default the next time you search? Because at some point you're just continuing to see this this alphabet soup of different companies, and I think we as an industry need to be respectful that in some cases there is a relationship with the customer. It's not always up for grabs.
I'm actually curious to see where that point of aggregation and consolidation happens. There's really three major players in the ecosystem, right? There's the content owners, there's the distributors, the content owners like a ESPN or the folks who are actually creating, NBC, Universal. There is the distributor, so your Amazon Primes who are kind of aggregating content to offer to a service. And then there's the device manufacturers like Roku or Apple, right? So at each point of that ecosystem, we're starting to see different folks flex their muscles in different ways, right? Like Amazon Prime, wanting a cut of any new signups from HBO on their service. We see Peacock trying to aggregate at the content level. Roku is certainly flexing their muscle in terms of, kicking apps off the platform or setting the terms. Apple, is notorious. We saw them take the Fortnite folks off the platform because they didn't want to share revenue there. So I don't know, where do we think the aggregation is going to happen? Where do we think that search is going to be?
I think in multiple places, but who knows how it's going to play out. I mean, there's definitely incumbents that, whether it's through search that you would describe people navigate to, or it's a direct brand relationship. But I do think that, you know, for the foreseeable future, I think it's going to be consolidated, you know, but amongst a few big players.
I don't want to get too Roku specific, but because it is such a popular platform, I think it's especially valuable to talk a little bit more about it. Mike, how can a platform like Roku help content providers succeed with the various business models?
Yeah, so I think first off, and I think Mark can probably agree with me, OTT is really hard. And so I think discovery is probably the biggest challenge for any OTT service, regardless of your business model. I think that's one where Roku is really trying to build best-in-class tools to drive content discovery. You know, from the moment a user purchases a device, we have discovery elements within the UI, we have banner ads, featured free search, and then we have the Roku channel, which is becoming one of our biggest drivers of engagement and discovery for content partners looking forward to the you know, the Rotten Tomatoes content there. So I think for each business model, what we've done is try to build best-in-class tools. For SVOD services, we have a one-click, you know, sign up, you know, which utilizes the credit card that's on file for a Roku user. We have subscription management, retargeting capabilities. So we can actually target a user with a banner ad on the home screen for someone who has fallen out of the sign-up flow. So if they try to sign up for HBO and for one reason or another decided not to continue that or complete that sign-up, we can retarget those users and help HBO acquire a sub on the platform. And then for AVOD services, we really help partners monetize their content. So we help bring demand, we enable access to third-party data, or enable access to data, and then we have third-party integrations with measurement services like Nielsen and Comscore to help our AVOD services really monetize that content. So ultimately, you know, our view, it's a virtuous cycle where Roku has access to 40 million plus households. We have discovery tools to enable partners to drive and build a massive audience, and then tools to help them monetize that audience so they can reinvest in the platform and continue to drive more users. So I would say it's definitely about helping in discovery and then monetization to help our partners succeed.
Darren, let's turn back to advertising for a moment before we sort of wrap things up with another big picture, future-looking question. How are OTT service providers and broadcasters changing their operating models in order to maximize their OTT revenue, OTT advertising revenue?
Yeah, I think it builds on a little bit of the earlier comments I said about, you know, needing more real-time data. You know, we operate a global content delivery network. We have people, you know, eyes on glass 24/7. Folks who are making sure that the bits and the bytes of these OTT services are moving freely around the world and being delivered out to, you know, the end user. We're starting to see almost an equivalent emerge with our customers on the ad operations front. Like we literally see folks who are, you know, keeping eyes on glass of their ad results during major events and making those changes. So that's definitely one way that we're seeing some of the operational you know, changes being made. Another thing is just a willingness to distribute and publish their content more broadly than ever, right? And so I think in the early days of OTT, the job was to get your linear channel and to move it to your own app. Now we're seeing the emergence of social media as a potential you know, syndication endpoint with, you know, implications on their advertising strategy. You know, these fast services or these virtual MVPDs are now becoming new partners for capturing revenue. The Roku channel being, you know, another example of that, or Samsung TV or other devices that have endpoints. And even in some cases, we're seeing OTT originated streams being published to cable headends and cable services to be one more channel in a traditional pay TV lineup. So from an operational perspective, that means more complexity on their back end. They have to manage the entitlements, they have to manage the rights, they have to manage the ad splits with a growing number of partners. And, you know, as a service provider, we're doing what we can to, you know, make that as simple as possible by doing some of those integrations ahead of time, you know, connecting to Twitch, connecting to Facebook, to, you know, Periscope, you know, making the connections with these different device manufacturers so that, you know, it can be as easy as, you know, one click within our UI to enable these new advertising models.
Before we move on to the wrap-up question, we do have one more question from the audience, and it's kind of a left field one, but I kind of like it. Speaking of discovery, what are your thoughts on taking live radio to OTT, radio on TV, using the audio audience to drive discovery? Anyone want to take that?
Radio on TV, isn't that Spotify? Isn't that something? Doesn't that already exist? I don't know. I think radio on TV is a feature of a traditional pay TV service where you can, get up in the high, 900 range and put on music on your television. But really, I don't think people listen to music on their TV. I think, the in-home speaker market and, other devices like that are kind of the new radio on TV in terms of, playing music or listening to the radio in your home.
Any other thoughts on that one? Okay, let's move on. I just thought it was an interesting question and wanted to see if people had thoughts. It's all about thinking outside of the box. So who knows what we're going to see. Let's wrap things up by going around the room, so to speak. And I'd like to ask you all, what do you think the biggest trends are to watch for in the future, next 6 months, 12 months, regarding OTT and monetization? You can go beyond monetization when you answer, but let's keep that at least as part of the focus. Sarah, you want to start with that?
Yeah, just the biggest trends you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's everything that we touched upon today. It is, the rise of ad-supported streaming television and the improvement of advertising technology for that ad-supported streaming television and making sure it's not overly redundant, to Darren's point, but also to my point, making sure it's privacy friendly. You're going to see a change between cinemas and, exhibitors and movie studios and digital TV platforms around windowing for movies moving forward. I believe that'll be a big thing to watch out for. And then the last thing is, and we didn't really get to talk about it too much on this panel, is there's been this massive programming boom. I mean, before the coronavirus, we were seeing more new original scripted shows per year over year growing than we ever had before. Now, obviously, production has been paused in the coronavirus, but I expect as things start to open up, you're going to see even more what I'm going to call customized TV, where there's so much options for programming that you can really craft this TV schedule of programming that's your own, that's unique to you, that would be so different than what your neighbor or friend would watch. And the reason that matters is if you think about in the beginning of TV, the 50s and 60s, that was not the case. Everyone in America watched the same shows in the same 3 networks. And so it's fascinating now that our television consumption diets, they're already this way, but they're going to continue to be even more customized than ever before.
Absolutely. Mark, your thoughts on trends for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sarah picked up on all the big ones. I think just to add to the last point, I think this user as the programmer of their own network is a really interesting way to think about the future, not only from content availability that appeals to you, but if the industry does it right, I think back to, I want to watch what is personalized to me. So let me know what's available, but at the same extent, I'll be a curator, but you also be an editor for me. And I think there's enough content now out there through Netflix example of there's always something for someone, but also as the tools and the user experience gets more sophisticated, I think, the consumer as the network will be really interesting to watch play out. A couple other things, just, the way I want to watch the landscape of what we think is really our competition, which is just general pools of people who have time spent and wallet share in environments that aren't necessarily long form content. So the Twitches of the world, the TikToks, the, other types of services where there's billing relationships, where consumers are aggregating content, it'll be interesting to see if long form content, there's been some experimentation with Fortnite doing screening of movie premieres. Be interesting to see if that starts to shift. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. And then lastly, I think that, as we start to think about how do we look at new forms of engagement of content through different form factors, we're a partner with Oculus where we power their transactional video on demand store. And so whether it's 20-minute clips or 30-minute TV shows, it'll be interesting to see how, whether it's augmented reality or virtual reality, ebbs and flows in its popularity, but with consumer consumption, if those devices are going to really start to show a real increase in engagement.
Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, the one trend that's really interesting to me is OTT really started out purely as on demand. You had Netflix and you would pick a title, and it was about moving away from traditional pay TV and linear. But what we've seen is that users really do enjoy that lean back linear experience. And so you're seeing services like Pluto, the Roku channel just launched an EPG or a live TV programming guide. It's seen tremendous engagement. So that's interesting to me, is that, OTT is now moving back towards that linear model, lean back, where users don't necessarily always want to pick what to watch. They just want to be told, hey, here's something great to watch, and you can kind of watch the linear stream. So I think that's an interesting trend.
All right, Darren, let's finish with you.
Bringing it home. Okay, so what we've seen from the pandemic is a greater willingness than ever for experimentation and innovation on the part of service providers. So especially around things like sports, where so much of your identity as a sports fan is wrapped up in a lot of the social elements of, going to the stadium, going down to the bar, wearing the uniform, talking with your friends. When you can't do that, when you're physically prevented from going to a stadium, it takes away part of that fan experience. So, for us, we're starting to see innovation around the social experience with viewing. We're seeing things like co-watching or co-viewing experiences kind of being brought to the norm. And to be honest, I think, Eric, you've been in this industry forever. We went through a second screen phase and, about 10 years ago, where everybody was doing companion apps and coupons and all these things. And, at that time we realized, well, maybe people just really wanted to be on Facebook and Twitter. They didn't want ancillary content related to the game on their second screen. I think we're kind of evolving, in that second screen stuff is coming back around, where now you want to watch with your friends. You want to have a video chat window going while you're also watching the game, so you guys can, you and your friends can watch together, right? So that's one of the things we recently launched at Verizon Media. We have a Yahoo Sports experience with the NFL, where you can, be on a video chat with 4 of your friends. The game and the video is all synchronized, so you're all seeing things at the same time. And we're seeing more and more of those kinds of things being brought out every day. So my hope is, as a fan of innovation, as a fan of building cool experiences that break the model of lean back and get fans more engaged and get them interested in the game, I hope we continue to see more and more of this, to really take advantage of all the things that digital can do, from new experiences to better ad targeting to personalization to all of the other things.
Absolutely. And speaking of personalization, we had a session on Tuesday about personalized channels. That'll be available on demand next week. In an hour, we've got a discussion about lessons learned from, or I guess lessons we're still learning from what's happened with the COVID-19 pandemic. So thanks to all my panelists this morning. This has been a great discussion. Thanks again to Limelight Networks for sponsoring Streaming Media West Connect, and to Verizon Media for sponsoring this panel. And hopefully we'll see some of you again in an hour. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Eric.